for everybody. There's a lot of great hockey players that can actually play in the league, but if you're actually trying to win a Stanley Cup, it's incredibly demanding.
Mark Messier once said he only feared the pressure he put on himself, but that self-imposed standard, it created something even more powerful. It forged 6 legendary rivalries that would push Messier to his absolute limits and ultimately define one of hockey's greatest careers. These weren't just opponents. They were the challenges that made Mark Messier truly unstoppable. Mark Messier built his entire career on one simple idea. The only pressure that mattered was the pressure he put on himself. He never celebrated coming in second place, not once. For Messier, winning the Stanley Cup, which he did 6 times, required a tremendous amount of work, and he would never diminish that achievement by comparing victories. Each one was unique because of how hard it was to get there. Even his jersey hanging in the rafters? He saw that as a symbol of the hard work of the people he played with. That's the Mark Messier mindset. Team first, victory only, no excuses. When Messier talks about his toughest opponents, he's not just remembering physical battles, he's cataloging the different kinds of talent that forced him to be at his best every single night. His definition of toughness goes way beyond just hitting hard. It includes skill, smarts, and the mental strength needed to win when everything is on the line. The 6 players he named fall into 2 categories. First, there's the toughness of will. These are the physical enforcers, the guys who challenged Messier's dominance through sheer force and intimidation. Players like Scott Stevens, Cam Neely, and Dale Hunter fit here. Then there's the toughness of mastery. These are the skill masters, the players whose genius and ability forced Messier to execute perfectly every time. Wayne Gretzky, Ray Bourque, and Eric Lindros belong in this group. The fact that Messier picked both bruisers and finesse players shows something important. He respected anyone who imposed their will on the game, no matter how they did it. Let's start with the physical warriors, the guys who made every shift a battle. Scott Stevens was the ultimate defensive wall of the 1990s. He didn't just play defense, he delivered punishment. His hits were devastating, high-impact checks that made every forward think twice before crossing the blue line. Stevens had a simple philosophy about hockey. He once said it's a hockey game, not figure skating. No one gets a free ride out there. That aggressive mindset was the perfect counter to Messier's own physical style. Stevens commanded such a powerful presence on the ice that opposing forwards would skate a little more scared, a little more cautious whenever he was out there. Anyone who didn't respect his space, they got destroyed. Simple as that. Messier thrived on physical confrontation, but Stevens was different. The video evidence shows just how intense their battles were, including a memorable hit Messier laid on Stevens during the crucial 1994 Eastern Conference Finals. That series was the peak of their rivalry. The Rangers had completely dominated the Devils during the regular season, posting a perfect 6 wins and 0 losses, but when the playoffs came, that 7-game series turned into an absolute war. Stevens' offensive numbers in that series were quiet, just 1 assist and a -3 rating, but his real contribution wasn't about points. It was psychological. Stevens was the most feared hitter of his generation. The competitive challenge Messier faced wasn't measured in statistics. It was measured in the constant mental focus required to play against someone who could change the game with one crushing hit. Messier built his leadership on intimidation. Stevens was one of the rare opponents who could genuinely intimidate him right back. Before we continue with these physical battles, think about the intensity of 1990s hockey, the hits, the rivalries, the sheer toughness required just to survive. If you respect that era and want to see more deep dives into hockey legends, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling us which of these hard-hitting enforcers was your favorite to watch. Stevens, Neely, Hunter? Let us know. Cam Neely was Mark Messier's mirror image. He combined elite goal-scoring ability with terrifying physical play. Neely was the perfect power forward of his time, and that made every matchup between them a direct test of who wanted it more. Neely was recognized as a generational talent. He was even selected for the potential 1995 Canadian national team. Alongside Gretzky and Messier, his game was built on a dangerous combination, high-skill scoring mixed with punishing physicality. This led to legendary battles when the Boston Bruins faced the Rangers. These weren't just games, they were intense, often violent physical wars that made the Messier versus Neely matchup the centerpiece of the rivalry. Neely was arguably the closest comparison to Messier in the entire league. If Messier was the relentless, unstoppable force pushing forward, Neely was the immediate, punishing counterforce pushing back. Messier's success depended partly on his ability to physically dominate and intimidate opponents. Neely was one of the very few players who had both the temperament and physical ability to match that aggression. Stride for stride, and Neely could still light the lamp. He remained a perennial high-skill goal scoring threat throughout his prime years. When discussing toughness, Messier had to reserve his highest respect for players who refused to back down from his style of leadership. Neely's presence meant Messier could never assume he'd physically dominate a game. He had to engage in a genuine duel for territory and competitive control control every single time the Rangers faced the Bruins. That made Neely one of the most exhausting adversaries Messier ever faced. Dale Hunter stands alone on this list as the master of disruption. Hunter wasn't defined by his offensive numbers or his size. He was defined by his relentless competitive grit and his ability to wage mental warfare. He challenged Messier's leadership and composure in the most volatile situations imaginable. Hunter's career spanned decades, and he became an emotional anchor for the Washington Capitals. His reputation was built on intense, uncompromising physical play. This often made him a controversial but pivotal figure in high-stakes playoff games. Looking at the Rangers versus Capitals matchups of the 1990s, Hunter was always at the center of physical brawls and energy-draining confrontations. These fights frequently involved Messier and other physical Rangers players. The playoff series between these teams in the early 1990s were absolute chaos. One example perfectly captures the volatile nature of these games. In a massive comeback victory by the Rangers, a crushing body check by Jeff Buchboom ignited a 7-goal unanswered rally against the Capitals. Hunter's presence guaranteed that every game, especially in the playoffs, turned into a chaotic physical war that tested the mental focus of everyone on the ice. Hunter's competitive value came from his endless ability to disrupt the opponent's flow and mindset. His goal wasn't necessarily to physically destroy players, it was to relentlessly provoke them. He forced Messier's Rangers to constantly manage their focus under extreme emotional stress and calculated provocation. For a player like Messier, whose personal code emphasized leadership and self-control, an opponent who constantly tried to pull him or his team off their game through pure antagonism represented a profound challenge. Hunter's ability to create sustained high-energy chaos made winning against the Capitals exceptionally difficult. It demanded constant competitive resolve from Messier to keep his team disciplined and focused on the ultimate goal instead of getting dragged into Hunter's game. Now let's shift gears and talk about the skill masters, the players whose genius forced Messier to be perfect. Wayne Gretzky is the most fascinating inclusion on this list. The challenge here was less about physical confrontation and more about something deeper. It was about Messier needing to prove he could achieve greatness on his own, separate from the greatest player in hockey history. Gretzky was the defining element of Messier's early career. Their partnership in Edmonton produced multiple championships. Messier served as assistant captain alongside Kevin Lowe, and their connection was deeply rooted in shared success building the Oilers dynasty. Everything changed on August 9th, 1988. That's when Gretzky was traded to the Los Angeles Kings. Messier has talked about the profound shock of absorbing that news. The Great One being dealt away marked the true birth of their competitive opposition. The existence of Gretzky as a rival presented a unique psychological burden and the ultimate standard of excellence. After Gretzky left, Messier stayed in Edmonton and proved something crucial. He led the team to the 1990 Stanley Cup, showing he could captain a championship team without Gretzky. But when Messier moved to the New York Rangers, the competitive narrative fully crystallized. The ultimate test of his leadership and his self-imposed competitive standard was to win a cup in New York, a feat that required overcoming Gretzky or teams of his caliber. This rivalry created the essential narrative for Messier's rise to standalone legendary status. It forced him to establish his own unique competitive identity, separate from the greatest scorer in history. The contrast between these two icons was fascinating. Gretzky himself once offered a perfect comparison when discussing players. He noted that during the Edmonton years, Messier was a little bit faster, more physical, and stronger. Meanwhile, Gretzky was a little bit more of a hockey guy, referring to his intellectual and strategic mastery of the game. For a player like Messier, who relied heavily on physical dominance and raw will, Gretzky's intellectual genius must have been incredibly frustrating, and thus the toughest kind of challenge, Gretzky's unmatched vision, puck control, and placement, made him nearly impossible to stop. To defeat Gretzky wasn't just about winning a physical battle, it was about overcoming a strategic mind capable of anticipating and exploiting every defensive setup. The necessity of competing against hockey's greatest offensive architect ensured that Messier maintained the highest possible competitive standard throughout his entire career. It fueled his relentless drive and validated his ultimate place in the Hall of Fame. Eric Lindros represented something Messier had never really faced before. The inevitable future, Lindros was the next generation power center, and he posed a challenge that was both physical and existential to Messier's dominance. In the 1990s, Lindros entered the league with overwhelming physical gifts. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 240 pounds. But here's what made him special. He possessed the offensive skill and agility usually seen in much smaller finesse players. A writer in 1991 noted that Lindros had proved himself to be a different kind of threat, a power player in what was largely a finesse game. From his debut with the Philadelphia Flyers in the 1992 to 1993 season, Lindros dominated. He averaged 1.36 points per game during his prime in Philadelphia. Only Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr had better numbers. He won the Hart Trophy in 1995 and became the centerpiece of the legendary Legion of Doom line, adding an interesting twist to the rivalry. Lindros had idolized Messier growing up. The rivalry between Messier's Rangers and Lindros' Flyers heated up significantly after the Rangers won the 1994 Stanley Cup. This set the stage for direct confrontations between the two premier power centers of the era. era. The rivalry reached its peak in the 1997 playoffs. In one crucial moment during Game 3, Lindros secured a hat trick and sealed the win with an empty net goal. How did he do it? By outworking Messier, something many people considered absolutely unthinkable. Lindros's competitive difficulty came from his ability to challenge Messier at his own game. He was the only contemporary player capable of matching Messier's unique combination of size, intensity, and offensive ability in the critical center ice power game, especially during high-pressure playoff moments. For Messier to acknowledge Lindros as one of his toughest opponents is huge. It's an affirmation of the young star's undeniable dominance. Even though injuries would tragically cut his prime short, Lindros was the player best equipped to physically dethrone Messier. His inclusion on this list is a testament to the maximum physical effort required to compete against the Flyers during that era. Ray Bourque represents the defensive extreme of the toughness of mastery category. His challenge wasn't rooted in intimidation or raw power. It was rooted in something arguably harder to overcome: sustained competitive perfection and technical flawlessness that made him virtually impossible to beat. Bourque's greatness came from his precision and agility. Analysis shows he relied on precise positioning rather than brute force. He possessed elite balance that made it incredibly difficult for opposing forwards like Messier to knock him off the puck. His skill set was enhanced by exceptional skating ability. He had unmatched lateral movement and agility that allowed him to instantly transition from a defensive stop to leading a high-speed offensive rush. Playing against Bourque meant facing an opponent who executed at a relentlessly perfect level and gave you virtually zero opportunities to exploit mistakes or use physical advantages. The competitive tension between Bourque and Messier went beyond team rivalries. It showed up in fierce competition for individual awards. In 1990, Bourque finished second to Messier in the closest Hart Memorial Trophy race in NHL history. This direct competition for the league's highest individual honor proves that their rivalry was about undisputed excellence at their respective positions. Their head-to-head competitive dynamic even extended to any all-star skill competitions, confirming their status as elite masters of their craft. Bourque showed exceptional consistency in the accuracy shooting challenge, hitting perfect scores in 1992 and 1993. This came shortly after Messier's own victory in the same event in 1991. The key principle here is that Bourque's challenge was sustained perfect technical excellence over 2 decades. Messier was a player who defined success by effort and maximizing potential. He respected Bourque immensely for his consistent perfection. Bourque forced Messier to be technically superior and strategically sound. Instead of relying solely on aggressive momentum, you couldn't just muscle your way past Ray Bourque. You had to outsmart him and outskate him while making zero mistakes. That's an incredibly difficult way to play hockey for 20 years. When you look at these 6 opponents together, a complete picture emerges. Wayne Gretzky required Messier to conquer unmatched offensive vision and strategic mastery. Scott Stevens demanded psychological strength against constant physical threat and rock-solid defense. Eric Lindros forced Messier to confront a player capable of beating him at his own power game. Ray Bourque required flawless execution against a defenseman whose consistency allowed zero margin for error. Cam Neely served as the physical parallel, demanding intense duels for territory and scoring success. And Dale Hunter tested Messier's capacity for discipline and composure against calculated, relentless antagonism. These 6 players didn't just oppose Mark Messier, they collectively perfected every aspect of competitive challenge. They forced Messier to evolve and achieve sustained excellence across his legendary 25-year NHL career. They were essential catalysts in forging his status as a legend. The toughness Messier defines is complete. It demands that a true competitor must conquer opponents of technical ability, physical power, and psychological strength. By requiring Messier to elevate his game in 6 distinct competitive dimensions, these opponents ultimately validated his own strict, self-imposed standard of greatness. True championships are validated by the quality of competition overcome. Messier respected Gretzky's intellectual mastery, Bourque's technical perfection, Lindros's overpowering force, the physical barrier Stevens built, Neely's mirror intensity, and Hunter's relentless antagonism. Their combined pressure ensured Messier never stopped improving. It validated his status as a player defined by competitive desire and leadership. For a champion whose entire life was dominated by a relentless drive for success, these 6 rivals weren't obstacles to complain about. They were necessary partners in creating his enduring legacy. If you loved learning about what made Mark Messier truly great, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we've got more deep dives into hockey legends coming your way. Hit that like button. If you respect the way Messier faced these challenges head on, and tell us in the comments which of these 6 opponents you think pushed Messier the hardest. Was it the genius of Gretzky, the punishment from Stevens, the mirror match with Neely, the perfection of Bourque, the power of Lindros, or the chaos of Hunter? Let us know what you think. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.